Hello, peoples, and welcome to Esoterica Cinema, the program where we take films and discuss the hell out of them. My name is Jason Peters, and with me, as always, is the man who received a cease and desist from Stuart Gordon to stop interpreting him as a man with a hardcore Chicagoan accent, Mr. Ryan Seabold!
What's up, Jason? How's it going, buddy?
It is going well. Yeah, Stuart's had enough, dude. Stewie G's like, I don't know how many times I have to tell you that. I sound like a completely normal individual, but you always doing me like this. You do me wrong, kid. You do me wrong.
Hey.
But we are not here to talk about the vocal stylings of Stuart Gordon. No, we are here to look at one of his movies. Ryan, hit us up with that description, sir.
That's right, Jason. Today's film says the word penial about 20 more times than I'm comfortable with. We're talking about From Beyond. This reunites us, as you pointed out, with director Stuart Gordon for the third time, having previously covered Re-Animator and Dagon, all three of which were based on H.P. Lovecraft stories. From Beyond drops us right into the hot action with Dr. Tillinghast, played by Re-Animator's Jeffrey Combs, as he cracks the code on an experiment by his mentor partner, Dr. Pretorius, played so well by Ted Sorrell, to expand the pineal gland. See, there's that word again. Reveal the hidden spiritual world around us and unlock untold horrors. The film co-stars the potentially more recognizable Barbara Crampton and Ken Foree as a psychiatrist and detective coming to investigate just what the hell is happening here. A question I'm still not sure I have the answers to. This was made in Rome on a budget of $4.5 million and brought in about $1.25 million, but has since become a cult super fave amongst the horror masses. But regardless of what they think, I'm here to ask you, Jason, what did you think about this movie, bud?
Now, here on the show, we have the pleasure of reviewing numerous films from across the cinematic spectrum. And while certain of those films carry an artistic weight in the form of visual metaphor and thematic ambiguity, this is not one of those films. Yet to say it does not possess artistry would demonstrate a certain ignorance of the other side of the cinematic prism, right? And that's the one that delights in blood and gore-soaked imagination. Is this a smart film? No. Does From Beyond examine any aspect of the human condition? Not in the slightest. Not at all. But it's a wonderfully imaginative film that I've seen like half a dozen times now. It's always fun. And we have to remember that sometimes cinema is an opportunity to relish in the darker corners of our imagination. And From Beyond does this in spades. It's exploitative, gory, raunchy, often dumb, sometimes unintentionally hilarious. And yet there wasn't a moment of this film that I didn't appreciate and enjoy. Everyone involved had a great time, from the gross, slimy practical effects to the unabashed sexuality. I'll forever treasure this uninhibited, grotesque, over-the-top, and ultra-pink film. How about you, sir?
Jason, in the movie's opening sequence, it states, they're at it again with those colored lights and the weird sounds.
With the colored lights and the weird sounds.
And then for the next 90 minutes, they give you all of that and so much more. As we wrap up and put a bow on our series covering classic body horror films, it was nice to step away from the heavy themes and dramatic performances and get back to some good old-fashioned creatures, goo, and boobs. Now, admittedly, some of the elements on display here didn't always work for me, but the one ingredient Gordon always brings to the table is fun. This movie is like a DiGiorno frozen pizza. From the acting performances to the makeup and effects, it's not great, but it is exactly what you want and need it to be, including, but not limited to, being 90 minutes.
Ryan's sweet spot. Wonderful. 85 to 90
Damn
minutes.
right. Oh, man. I do everything for 90 minutes. 90 minutes is that just,
that's why they call him a 90-minute man, by the way. Which
they call me a 90-minute man. Yeah.
Absolutely. So, Ryan, I believe that undoubtedly a huge reason for the film's success is just like the overall look and feel of the production, coupled with a lot of those practical creature effects, right? In the form of these twisted human bodies and giant alien worms and flying interdimensional eels, all the colored slime and all of that. Would you agree with that?
Yes, absolutely. I didn't always have answers for why the things were on screen, but I loved that they were on screen. So no complaints here. Moving on.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, again, when we talk about like, why do we come to horror films, and oftentimes, again, it's not for, some great screenplay that, is really rich in detail, and we learn a lot about the human condition or experience all these different emotions. It kind of taps into, what I often refer to as like the 14-year-old boy in all of us, right? And sometimes that can be like robots, and often in horror, it looks like creatures, and there was just this wonderful sweet spot of like early to mid 80s to early to mid 90s, about 10 years there, right? Where the guy in the rubber suit, the classic guy in the rubber suit, was sort of taken to this next level, right? And we've been looking at a lot of those films in this body horror series that all kind of came out in that 80s sort of sweet spot, right? The Fly, From Beyond here, all of these, Society was late 80s, but released in early 90s. So all of this is in that sweet spot. And it really took just, the artistry of latex and rubber suits to the next level. And then also combining it with really unique takes on gore. A lot of this was sort of almost inspired by the censors, right? Evil Dead 2 famously tried to use different colors of blood to get around, getting an R rating. And in From Beyond, they tried to do the same thing. They're like, well, the censors don't really like blood, so we're going to use slime. And much to their chagrin, they actually found out that the censors found slime more disgusting than blood, and it only doubled down further on their rating.
Yeah, I mean, the 80s horror films that we're covering here and so many others really were the auteur movement of its era.
Absolutely.
So 80s, immediately you think of the 70s as like their auteur movement was all the Scorseses and De Palmas and all of that.
Sure.
But then, you move into the 80s and it's blockbuster city. It's Spielberg, Lucas having a heyday with, Raiders of the Lost Ark and, all the big bombast and big budget films all the way through Ghostbusters and all of that. But then you get into, like you said, the mid 80s into the early 90s, when practical effects were still relevant before CGI took over, and it lent itself very well to really an auteur movement. And we've already covered films like Brain Dead / Dead Alive with Peter Jackson. We all know where Peter Jackson went on to go. Wes Craven, obviously, got his start in this era. John Carpenter.
Sure.
And here we are with Stuart Gordon. Now, unfortunately, or whatever, Stuart Gordon didn't go on to have the career that a Joe Johnston might have had, or some of these other guys. But yeah, man, I mean, there was a good solid 10 years that just kind of framed what the next 10 years would be. A lot of these people went on to bring things that they were learning on these, $1 to $5 million budgets, and then they were eventually given $20 to $150 million in the case of Peter Jackson to go make whatever the hell they wanted. But even in Lord of the Rings, you see a lot of these early sensibilities that you're seeing right here on display in a film like From Beyond carry on through. So, practical effects made huge strides with Industrial Light and Magic coming into play with Star Wars. People were learning as they kind of progressed, even George Romero's crew with Tom Savini and stuff like that. So here we are smack dab in the middle of it, 85, 86, 87 with movies back to back like Re-Animator and From Beyond, where Stuart Gordon has given us just that sweet, sweet goo and alien goop. And all the rubber suits and makeup and costuming and stuff like that too. And again, carrying on through the early 90s with movies like Society that we just covered and all of that. So this has been a great run, and it's really, really nice to look back.
Yeah. From Beyond is a great capper too. And I think it's important that we look at this film through the lens of exploitation cinema, which is absolutely what this film is, right? It was produced by Charles Band, as you said, immediately after he purchased Dino De Laurentiis' studios in Rome. And Dino De Laurentiis was known for doing these very big, huge sword and sandals epics. That was really like what he cut his teeth on. He did the Conan movies, for example. And so converting it into a sci-fi and horror house was kind of a, controversial move. But also it was one of those moves where, you don't normally see these types of budgets for these type of exploitation films. $4.5 million in 1985, 1986 is nothing to sneeze at, at least with inflation, that's double that. So that's like, going off today and making like a $10 million, blood and guts and latex sort of film, And I think it's also important to remember that like how much you're going to respond to this film does it is indicated by how much you enjoy that type of material, right? Like, and I'm talking about the practical effects and the gore effects specifically, right? Like, I'm one of those dudes. I can never get enough latex, right? Like Screamin' Mad George, all of the special effects wizards that worked on this one here today, From Beyond. I'll drop their names a little bit later, or even just other films that we've seen around this time, right? Like I love in the Twilight Zone movie, the goblin on the airplane wing, and the way that was done all practical effects. And he's got his like hand up on John Lithgow's face and stuff, like that's super awesome to me. Just as watching Ted Sorrell be done up in like 120 pounds of latex with this like mutated interdimensional body that splits apart and it becomes this grotesque insect head, right? Like if you're watching me or you're listening to me talk about this right now and that sounds exciting to you, yes, this is absolutely for you. And Stuart Gordon films in general will be for you. But again, we always talk about it like this isn't something my mom's going to like. This isn't something my wife is going to like, right? Like they're much more traditional viewers in what they appreciate. And so there's no plot to get you through this. There's, not really that interesting character development. We see a little bit of Barbara Crampton's character, but, even that's kind of just an excuse to get her half naked, because that's what you do in these sort of exploitation films. Again, they're called exploitation films for a reason. They exploit the audience. They exploit the actors and actresses and everybody associated with it. They're not making high art. They're here to give you some of the, baser appreciations that we might have for material. Again, buxom broads and, skimpy outfits and, gory visual effects and blood splattering all over the place. And they also did a lot of those, the car chase movies and the racing movies for the gearheads with just lots of like rah, 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 stuff going on. Right. So again, like none of these films are art, but they are entertainment. And once again, sort of going back to my previous, statement, like we do have to remember that like sometimes movies can exist just as pure entertainment. And, it doesn't have to be for everybody. It's it's entertainment for a specific subsect of us that like this material. And, in a way it's nice to be catered to because it happens so infrequently, especially when you get a budget like this.
This kind of falls in the tier to me, like a little bit above, like a Roger Corman or a Trauma selection that was also kind of going on in this same time period, but a little bit below the Peter Jackson Dead Alive, Brain Dead kind of stuff that was going on. And then of course, that's why you see Peter Jackson, Wes Craven, John Carpenter being elevated to a little bit higher stature, as they moved on later in their career.
Absolutely.
But Stewie G just kind of like found his sweet spot and knew where he needed to be and wrote it out. He did, we talked about this a little bit on Re-Animator, but he did, go on to write and produce and kind of create the world and was supposed to originally direct, Honey, I Shrunk the Kids and created that whole world. But, outside of that was kind of his one big mainstream effort, if I'm not mistaken. So as far as the plot goes, you're saying that, that this is an exploitation film. You're here for what you're here for, but I did wish I felt like this was trying to be, this film From Beyond was trying to be maybe a little too many things. It was like a little smattering of like too many little things. Okay. So like I was a little unclear in that the film kind of opens up with the carnal desires, but then it's like kind of limited on the sex stuff and the sex stuff doesn't really go anywhere. Which kind of makes that feel a little bit out of place. Like as the pineal gland, however you say it, kind of awakens, that I guess is, some kind of connection into your arousal in your body, which, okay, I'll go down that road, but it never kind of saw that through. It kind of stepped away from that. Like there was only really that one scene of Crampton in the leather lingerie stuff. Yeah. And then, the doctor was like super horny and like, had her in the negligee and stuff like that. It was like, I'm going to make her feel things. But then as we moved on in the film's plot, they didn't really reference that anymore. And then it was more about, turning the assistant into, Jeffrey Combs into like a new creature. I didn't really know what the goal was. Like, what was the end game of Dr. Pretorius? Like to bring that world into the mainstream world or to turn, his assistant into a new creature? Or was it like sexual based? It was all just kind of based on that opening up the third eye and then like the pineal gland, as it opens up, it's like, it's so beautiful. But then like you cut to the point of view of the pineal gland, and it's just like 8-bit, like Atari graphics. And I was like, dude, real life is like way prettier than that, man. I don't know why you're so addicted to like this like weird Atari graphics situation, like Tron or something. But anyways,
Yeah.
I digress.
Yeah, I mean, they make some loose justifications for a lot of this stuff, and I could sit here and be like, well, right, and they tried to do this, that, blah, blah, blah. I think there's a lot of real threadbare connections that they make, and I think a lot of it is just reverse engineered to try to make the movie they wanted to make, which was, again, this sort of unabashedly violent and sexual exploitation film, So now, I will say part of it is based on some, some real science that's not really well developed, but the pineal gland in real life is responsible for sexual stimulation. They don't really know too much about it. They just know that there is a direct connection there. So I think that was enough for, Stuart and Brian Yuzna and all of them to just be like, okay, cool. Yeah, no. So then we can get everyone naked now. Awesome. Sweet. That's all we need, right? And then we'll have a little like, penis thing come out of their forehead where it is too. And we'll make those illusions, right?
Yeah.
But again, it's really just mostly an excuse to enjoy some really wonderful practical effects. And this would be a good time to go ahead and acknowledge those FX artists that I was talking about a minute ago. And so we basically got 4 dudes that are responsible for all of this. And their names are John Buechler, John Nowlin, I believe is how you say it, Anthony Dublin, and Mark Sjostrom. Now, Mark Sjostrom never actually ended up going out to Rome. He actually worked on everything back here in the States, and then a bunch of stuff was shipped overseas, which they said ended up costing as much as like all of their salaries combined anyway. So it's like, she just got them out there, but they were comfortable working on it back home. But it's interesting to note that the film actually contains 86 effects scenes, and that's pretty remarkable for a $4.5 million, 85-minute film from 1986 made by what was it? Empire, I think was the name of Charles Band's production company. Which, by the way, this was the second most expensive film that they ended up funding. Obviously, they lost money on it. And the only film that they ended up spending more money on over the course of while they were active was a science fiction film called Arena, which I actually have not seen, but features a bunch of dudes in rubber suits wrestling on some, intergalactic tournament of sorts or something like that.
I'm always wondering how these people keep getting funding. We've covered so many films on this show that have lost money consistently, like a lot of it. And so it's like, who lined up to give these guys more? Because Stuart Gordon was just getting warmed up. He went on to go do several other films after this.
Yeah.
And it's like, man, how do you look at that track record and be like, oh yeah, no, I got $5 million for you. Well, I'm only getting like 1.5 back. No problem. Let us know when you want it. We'll cut right the check.
Yeah. Well, the other thing to remember at the time, though, in answer to that, is that you had a secondary stream. It wasn't just box office and then bust. You had VHS, and this is when VHS was becoming huge. And so, to answer your question, that's where a lot of that came from, because they're like, look, we're only going to make half of the money back on box office, but like, don't panic, because like this VHS thing is booming. Everybody wants these types of films. We can make another, 3 to 5 on the, like, that's where our money's going to come from, is on that back end,
Sure.
And I think that's how they
kind of like
selling
streaming
that.
Is now.
Yeah, but there was more. I mean, I think you had, better splits back then where it was, because nowadays people talk about that, like, it's kind of, the mid-budget film is kind of dead because it can't make its money in the theatrical run. And then they don't have any sort of like, second run to support it, because Netflix famously doesn't give splits. They just pay up front and there's no back end points. So it becomes, just the model with that has changed. There's a lot less money on the back end to go around if something pops off, and that's for better and worse. There's less risk up front, but there's less benefit on the back end. There's less reward potentially. So,
well, to your point, and we've talked about this several times on this show, so I won't go too deep in this rabbit hole, but to your point, Stuart Gordon was for a long time kind of the master of what we like to call the box art, film, where we all remember seeing his movies, the box art from his films in like VHS stores when you were a kid. And you may not have gotten around to seeing the film itself, but you definitely remember the artwork for Re-Animator. That was like bright green and yellow and had Jeffrey Combs like pouring out of the test tubes and all of that. And From Beyond is yet another one of those box art films that I remember seeing on the shelf many times. I don't think I mentioned this at the top, but this was my first viewing of this movie.
Oh, nice, dude.
I've never seen
awesome.
This before.
Very cool.
So I'm glad we finally got to it, because again, I remember this very distinctly as a kid, seeing this in Blockbuster. walking past it in the horror section, just never giving it a chance or really knowing much about it. So.
Yeah, that's awesome. One of the things that's really cool about the way that the special effects were handled too is that all of these guys were super talented. And so basically each of them was sort of like given their own piece of the pie, and they were able to sort of take it back and just use their creativity and imagination to do what they did best, right? So for example, like you have John Buechler, and he's really big into like doing like aliens and insects and stuff like that. But then you have like a John Nolan, and he's like really, or an Anthony Dublin, and they're really good at just like manipulating the body, you know, and the human body and making it look all weird and shit. And so it ended up being this cool thing where each of them kind of got to like go back and do their own designs and then come together and figure out how they could incorporate their specific genius alongside one another. And so that's what led to some of those wonderful moments, like when we see, you know, the misshapen, grotesque Pretorius body, you know, it's got like the long neck and it's this big like dinosaur mutated looking thing, right?
Dude, so
very cool. And then but they don't stop there, because then like he tears open his head, right? And then you have this like praying mantis insect thing with like mandibles and stuff that's like underneath that, right? And so that was kind of how you got that, is because Buechler was like the big insect guy, and Nowlin and Dublin were the big body guys, and Sjostrom did a lot of the animatronics, because they actually used animatronics like for that big creature. And so they were all were like, hey dude, you know, let's go ahead and do your thing, and then it'll split apart into my thing, and then we can use his animatronics to like move it over here. And so there ended up being this like really cool synthesis between the four of them. And that's kind of what gives, you know, that's kind of why we have, I think, so much energy and so many unique ideas in those creature effects over the course of the film, instead of just, you know, like, here's the one thing and then, you know, we're out and let's just hammer that. Dude, we didn't even talk about the giant guar worm that's in the basement.
I love the giant guar worm.
That was so awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now there's actually a very funny about a story about that guar worm. So that was one of the ones that Sjostrom and them had made back at the States. And so they used, you know, whatever the particular latex foam material was, right? And they made this giant guar worm. And so they ship it overseas, and the filmmakers are like, cool, you know, we're going to go ahead and throw it in this basement that's like completely filled with water. And they're like, what do you mean water? And they're like, well, yeah, it's the basement. It's filled with water. They're like, oh, that you might find some trouble with the worm in that case, because nobody had told them that it was going to go in water. And so they used a material that absorbs water. And so they had this giant, you know, 12 foot by 18 foot, whatever the hell it is, you know, worm thing that's difficult.
Basically a sponge.
Exactly. And so, you know,
it's now going to be 400 pounds.
Exactly. So they've got it on a system of pulleys and all of this, but because it's so heavy, they can't get it to like Stuart Gordon's like, no, it's got to like rush out of the water and be like rah, super fast. But like they've got the strongest dudes hoisting it, and they can just get this slow come up because it's so heavy from just absorbing all of that water. So that was something that was not exactly, you know, on their radar, but you know, it ended up working. You know, you used some creative editing and they were able to make it work, because again, you loved the guar worm and I still love the guar worm. So
I think about the only thing that didn't work for me was the flying monster, when he turned into like the ghost flying monster, which was only on screen for a second. So it wasn't that big of a deal. It wasn't
like
a deal breaker.
Eels?
No. When he sprouted the wings, when Dr. Pretorius sprouted the wings and was like chasing Tillinghast down the stairs and all of that, Barbara Crampton down the stairs, and he was like flying. He was like a flying monster. Like a gargoyle of sorts. And
I literally do not remember like that moment. That's crazy.
Yeah, no, absolutely. He sprouts wings and flies down the stairs, and that's kind of, it's definitely towards the end of the film. I want to say it's when Crampton puts the time bomb, which by the way was like the silliest Acme time bomb. Like, who gets red sticks of dynamite with an alarm clock? Like, that's so.
I mean, a lot of this film was kind of tropey in its production design. Like the lighting effects are
so
cool,
great,
the resonator is cool, but it, you know, it's definitely out of like that 1950s mad scientist thing, right? Like even just down to all of like, you know, the big wires that are plugged in and just all of that. So it was more just,
it's almost like Adam West Batman, like, you know, very very schlocky, with the big time bomb with the ticking clock on it and everything.
Yeah.
That, by the way, takes like 45 minutes to count down for like 3 minutes or whatever. It took so long. She sets that clock for 2 minutes and I'm like, oh, this is going to wrap up quick. And then it's like, still going. I'm like, oh, this is comical. Again, very Batman, Adam West Batman, when he's got the bomb and running away from the sharks.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. And that's very much some of, one of those sort of like 80s tropey things, right? Like, here's the 10-second countdown that takes 4 minutes, right? Like,
right,
so they're definitely not
so
shying
fun.
away from that. Now, the film was directed by Stuart Gordon. It was produced by Charles Band, stars Jeffrey Combs, Barbara Crampton, and Ted Sorrell. And this is a hell of a team, dude. These are all people who have B-movie sensibilities, but I would argue that they have A-movie talents. I think a number of the artistic decisions were the result of Stuart Gordon, who makes a number of smart decisions about his often dumb movies, just in general. I like the idea and the decision to lean into these timeless practical effects, these evergreen lighting decisions, right? Like especially when you consider that like colored gels have kind of made a comeback in the last few years, it kind of makes From Beyond feel a little bit more relevant or recent than maybe it should be. And I also just wonder if that's sort of just, aesthetically speaking, the circle kind of came back around. But was there anything that stood out to you about Stuart's direction or the production of the film that kind of maybe helped elevate it that you recognized?
The fact that the crew and the cast, Stuart Gordon, everybody involved with this film knew what this film was, like what you were kind of saying at the top of the show. And so, when you look at an exploitation film like this or a very low budget production, I think it's easy to cast it aside and say that they were trying to do this, but failed. And so it looks cheap or it looks, but so many of these horror films of this era weren't trying to be, big budget. They're not trying to be James Cameron. They knew what they were, they knew what their constrictions were, and they just leaned into it heavy. And so it never feels like they were missing the mark. They just set the mark a little lower and knocked it out of the park. You know what I mean? And that's way better to me, when you're just lowering expectations and then exceeding those by 10%.
Absolutely.
If that makes sense.
No, yeah, 100%, man. Yeah.
So you just go into this film not, and to that end, what you end up with is just like, again, like it's junk food, you're not expecting a gourmet meal. This is junk food. You knew this was junk food when you opened the bag of Doritos, but God damn it, it's so delicious. And I'm going to eat every last one of these Cheez-Its or whatever your junk food of choice is. And so,
it's your cheat day meal. You're not like hanging all your calories on this day in, day out, but you're like, you know what? Yeah, today I'm getting the Big Mac or the Whopper or the whatever, or the pizza.
Right. Like I said, it was just fun all the way through. It rarely made sense. I don't know if you saw this, but did you see that Siskel and Ebert actually reviewed this on their show?
No,
and
I did
Gene
not.
Siskel not only gave this a thumbs up, but claimed that he liked this way more than Aliens.
That's amazing.
He hated Aliens notoriously. And he reviewed this. He's like, dude, this movie rips shit compared to Aliens.
I found the movie to be so cleanly told by director Stuart Gordon and so forcefully acted in that last scene by Barbara Crampton and Jeffrey Combs, as well as also earlier Ted Sorrell as Dr. Pretorius, the guy who wants to know more than any man in the world, that I enjoyed this little horror film more than Aliens. It didn't gross me out. It didn't bore me. It tickled me. I think this is a really good little picture.
That is
Roger
fantastic.
Ebert decidedly disagreed because of course he did. But Gene Siskel gave this a big old thumbs up and we have to celebrate him for his love of the schlock.
Attaway, buddy. We salute you, Siskel.
I was just surprised a movie like this made it on their show,
right?
But
yeah. Usually
it
was only on there just so they could like eviscerate it, but like not actually like be responding positively to it. That's amazing.
Nope.
And
not Siskel, man. He wanted to bring some light to this and talked very highly about Stuart Gordon. I think he said that he liked this more than Re-Animator, but definitely loved this more than Aliens, which he hated for whatever reason. I'll have to watch that review next.
That's amazing. Yeah, I think for me, thinking about Gordon and his influence, I appreciated that he just lets his movies, and specifically this movie, be a visual experience, between the floating eel effects and the crazy makeup and this hallucinatory lighting, it all adds up to an experience that can really only be had with cinema. I mean, you could probably do some of this stuff on a stage and do it successfully, but, having a camera there allows us to really get in close on a lot of those crazy effects, and sometimes that's for the better and sometimes that's for the worse, but for me, I'm past the point where it's like, oh, that doesn't look real. It's like, of course not. It's a giant human bat from a different dimension. Like, there is no real version of that. So just have fun with it, And I think that's really, you mentioned it before, is just the element of having a lot of fun with this film. And speaking of fun, I did think there was another sort of humorous anecdote where they were talking about the eels. And because they wanted the eels to be translucent, they ended up building this device, and then they covered it with a condom. So basically each of these eels was this like big squiggly condom thing. And they just absolutely looked like sex toys the entire time on set. Like this is like weird vibrating sex toy thing that you're like, oh, okay, I guess I'm scared of that. Oh, so
I hope Stewie G provided them, and then everyone was like, where did you just have all these? He's like, yeah, I'm horny. I got all these condoms. What am I going to do with the condoms? I've been using them, and I got so many extras. I'm sponsored. So I got to use them in my movies, and, let's put them on the fucking lamprey eels. We'll make them look like little floating dicks. It's going to be great. Pineal gland.
Ryan, I'm sorry to tell you, I've actually just gotten a direct message from the lawyers of Stuart Gordon. You can be expecting a knock on the door very soon.
I hope they're horny.
Oh, let's also, we didn't even mention Ken Foray as Bubba Brownlee. He's
good.
Actually quite fun, even in those little red Speedos that they have him wear inexplicably into the, fighting the guar worm. He does a ton of heavy lifting as the comic relief. And apparently on the commentary track, the actors, he wasn't on that one, but the other actors and filmmakers were saying that like exactly how he is on film is exactly how he is in real life. Like, it's not one of these ones where he created a character, like he was that character. And so they were just like, hey, bring that energy. So, and again, like you do sort of want it's a comic relief character, but thankfully they don't give him like super cheesy puns or something, but it's just funny the way he's like, well, explain to me that hard on I got there back then. Like that's a super funny line, and just the general energy that he brings to it. So I did really appreciate his performance.
He kind of acts as like the voice of the audience a lot of the times, because a lot of what you're thinking, like, get the fuck out of there. Like he'll be the first one to say, we need to get the fuck out of here. You know what I mean? And so it plays as funny, but also I think a lot of that humor is because you were thinking that just a second ago, and and Stuart Gordon and the writers anticipated that and allowed him to just kind of voice that in the film. So it's almost a breaking of the fourth wall kind of, piercing the veil to the audience a little bit. So I appreciated his character. And again, he's so recognizable as a, horror icon, or a, blood and guts kind of movie icon from this era. I immediately recognized him from the original Dawn of the Dead.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
He's been in a lot of the Rob Zombie movies. And all of that. So yeah, he's an excellent addition to this cast.
Yeah. Oh, and let's also give a shout out to his death. That's one of the more like classic, like
absolutely
just cut a hole in and have the dude stick his head in there, and then he's like, "Oh, my body!" Oh. Like, and again, dude, some of these moments, they're just so like, kind of cheesy funhouse moments, but they work. And again, dude, it's like, I don't know about you, but like, I love the funhouse at a carnival. Like, it's cheesy as shit. And like, you can always just look at the ground and get out of the mirror thing. And like the, springs are all like creaky, and like the stuff doesn't even like bounce out at you like it's supposed to. But like, God damn it, if it's not just so much fun. And every now and then when I watch a movie, I'm like, this is like the old shitty funhouse at the carnival. Like, it's been around for a while and it's kind of starting to show its age, but I'm still going to enjoy it every time. Here's my 4 or 5 tickets. Let me on,
Well, and then, you get some of this overacting, like what you're just describing, in Brownlee's death scene and stuff like that. Or, the way some of these lines are delivered all through this body horror series. We've seen this, and the over dramatic performances and all the bombast and stuff like that. But again, it was kind of just that era, because you could trace that same level of performance into things like WWF.
Yeah, no,
wrestling,
absolutely.
All through this same stuff. And even, I said on the last episode, I recently, with Romulus coming out and all of that, I've been in an Aliens vibe. And you go back and you watch James Cameron's Aliens, and like, dude, Bill Paxton's performance in that film is like so over the top. Game over, man.
Game over, man. It's game over.
Like, he's so over dramatic, like throughout the whole film.
Yeah.
So I think that, there was just a lot of that going around,
Mhm.
and this just, felt right at home to bring that level of performance, into this kind of a film. It was just so great to see.
Absolutely. And I do also want to recognize producer Charles Band's brother, Richard Band, who was responsible for composing the score for the film. And this is actually a very highly regarded score. A lot of people consider it to be one of the better B-movie scores, kind of like of all time. And one of the interesting things about it is that, generally speaking, so Charles Band did Re-Animator. He does all of the Band Brothers movies, and his brother produces them. And so he really likes to score by way of theme. So generally what he'll do is he'll watch the movie, he'll get a sense of what the overall theme or themes of the film is, and then will create his compositions based on that. But as he was watching this film, he kind of found that like it doesn't really have a clearly defined theme, and we've kind of alluded to that. Like it's not like a really well-defined story, and this is what this is about. And we don't even really understand quite why Barbara Crampton's character is so obsessed with doing all this sort of stuff. So he just incorporated different motifs. And so he's like, okay, we're going to go with the horror film that uses the strings. When we've got this interdimensional stuff, I'm going to put in some little like wispy chime type music. And so, there's a lot of just effects that are doing heavy lifting and stuff like that. But I did find it interesting for him to sort of acknowledge that like, yeah, there's not really, there weren't really a lot of themes here. So instead, I just tried to basically take the best elements of, John Williams and all of these different composers at the time, and then piece them together to make this work.
Absolutely.
All right. Now, Ryan, before we slap an official rating on this film, I would actually love to know personally, like where this film sits on your pantheon of Gordon and Yuzna films. Because as to your point earlier, we've done a lot of their work now. We've done Re-Animator, From Beyond, Society, a bunch of different films. So where does From Beyond rank with the other films in their catalog for you?
I think Society takes as number one with a bullet for me.
Okay.
And then this is hard because I'd have to look back and see what I gave these star rating wise. I may be contradicting myself, but just off the dome, I would say Society, probably From Beyond, Re-Animator, and then Dagon.
Yeah. Yeah, I think this is sort of like my, it's either my 1B or my number 2. I think that it's either Society or this. That's kind of like my favorite. That's right there. Part of it is because, admittedly, I'm a huge sci-fi nerd, both cinematically and with literature and stuff. So, as well as I love vibrant, colorful gels and gore. So it's just like, it took everything that I love and put it in this one film, even if it might be lacking in some of the more traditional aspects of like a well-told story and a well-told film.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I think all of that combines to probably make this the best strict H.P. Lovecraft adaptation that we've seen on screen. Like we both think it's better than Re-Animator, like we just said. And I think the only other one that kind of came out that really impressed people was Stanley Kramer's Color Out of Space, which I enjoyed, but I think I enjoy this film much better. So,
yeah, I mean, this one had so many great ingredients. I feel like Society is a better film. Like, I think that it's got a more of a told story. I knew what was going on. It has a nice conclusion at the end, even though it's very abbreviated, obviously, but at least when the credits rolled, I kind of got the gist, and I was with that main character all the way through. But this one was a little more helter-skelter, but it was still more, you could tell that they were trying to up the ante from Re-Animator. Yeah. They learned a lot on Re-Animator. Re-Animator was great for what it was, but instead of just having a floating cunnilingus head, they had a full realized monster, and then that monster turned into another monster, There's the guar worm down below. There's the floating lamprey ghosts and all of the things. So yeah dude, they were definitely trying some new stuff, and it was made practically back to back. So they didn't even have, that much time to really kind of ramp up. It was just like, fuck it, let's crank this thing to 11. And they did. But then I think, like I said, they kind of slid back a little bit, leaned on Screamin' Mad George, and Brian Yuzna was able to create more of a fully realized film. That to me, I think Society is just maybe a step above in that regard. But we've made perfectly clear throughout the years that you do enjoy Dagon a lot more than I do. I thought that one stalled. It had a great resolution. I just thought that film as a whole stalled out more, like leading up to that resolution. These three that the other three films that you're comparing, were more like all the way through fun. Yeah. Where Dagon kind of made me wait for it a little more. So just my take.
Sure.
For whatever that's worth.
Well, also for whatever it's worth, the producer, Richard Band, would absolutely agree with you, which is why when Stuart Gordon and Brian Yuzna approached him to make Dagon the follow-up to Re-Animator, he said, "You want to make fish people? That's dumb. No chance." Why on earth would you even bring this to me?
I do like the crazy mermaid chick in the bed, that, you know, with all the tentacles and shit, crazy tentacle monsters. Always a fan favorite here on Esoterica Cinema. Moving on.
Let's go ahead and progress to the top 3 moments. And for From Beyond, I'm going to go ahead and start us off this week. So let's get into this.
Hell
here.
Yeah, buddy. Yeah.
So for number 3, Dr. McMichaels gets hypnotized by the resonator. Now, this is the moment where we actually see her parroting that same dialogue that Pretorius delivered at the top of the film. And so it allows us, the audience, to experience the exact moment where she does fully cross the line from intrigued to obsessed. You know, in a movie without like a ton of meat on the bone, like we discussed, there is something of a character arc where Dr. McMichaels is, you know, starts off very repressed and closed off and, you know, opens herself up, obviously sexually, but also just in general. And then that actually ends up turning into like madness by the time we get to the final scene and end the film that way. Number 2, Crawford Tillinghast gets his head devoured by a giant guar worm. We just mentioned it. The sheer spectacle of the moment. It's exhilarating. It sets into motion the whole device of the protruding pineal gland organs that we're going to see manifested in the latter half of the film. And it was sort of interesting to use that as a device to basically like strip him of all of his body hair and the hair on his head and such too, just because it does give him this really weird, disturbing sort of look. Especially, you know, after they've also manipulated his head to have this contraption underneath for which the gland can come out of and stuff. So, but yeah, just again, watching that guar monster whip around and seeing him have to jump over it and all of that. Super fun. Oh, and so the moment where Brownlee comes in and he like stabs it in the back with the knife and just pulls it back and it's got all of like the slime and goo on it too. That was a lot of fun.
Yep.
And then
so much fun.
And then for my number 1 moment, we mentioned it earlier. It's the mutated Pretorius head splitting open to reveal that insectoid head. It's just a feat of practical makeup and effects. It's, you know, these type of moments that make the film so much fun to revisit. Dude, 40 years later, like, let's not forget, this is a 40-year-old movie. So to see this type of production is still holding up, you know, obviously you can tell that, you know, again, it's fake and it's a guy in a suit, but the artistry and the level of detail, you know, like the sculptors and the effects teams were obviously all so passionate, you know?
Right. So, you know, you talk about this being, you know, oh, it's low budget and this and that, but to me, these monsters were no less fully realized than like the Library Ghost or Slimer and Ghostbusters. Sure, You're dealing with a lot of miniatures and rubber suits and slime and goo and people were just, you know, doing it practically back then. So, you know, even the ghosts and Raiders at the end when the arc opens up and the face melting scene.
Yeah, of course, like, we love that.
That's no different to me than some of the stuff we're seeing on display here. You know, the only difference is you've got Harrison Ford acting against it instead of, you know, Jeffrey Combs and Barbara Crampton. So maybe it could have been a little elevated, you know, and you don't have the sweeping score of John Williams to carry it along. So, you know, these some of these movies, the effects weren't, you know, any better per se. They just were surrounded by, you know, a better situation perhaps to carry it along in a much larger budget. Let's be honest.
Yeah.
So anyway,
it's also fun to look at the crossover because I forget who it was, but I want to say that someone who worked on The Fly was the guy who was responsible for that face melting scene from Raiders of the Lost Ark. It was one of the body horror movies that we looked at recently. So, and then one of the, I want to say it was Showstrom, but one of the effects artists on this film actually immediately left this to go work on Evil Dead 2 for Sam Raimi.
Okay.
Yeah, so a lot of these guys, right? We've got Nick Benson, who did Society, and he's showing up later doing Night of the Demons and Tremors. So it's really cool to see these effects guys, and it's a really cool opportunity to check out these films, and that gives us an opportunity to actually get to know some of these people and who they are, and really just acknowledge them, you know, because they are deserving of a lot more respect than they get and recognition, right? Just because it's one of those thankless positions that doesn't get called out. You're not in front of the camera, but God damn it, you know, they're the entire reason that movies like From Beyond work. You could hold off all the other stuff if you just had them and their work and you made a short film about a bunch of crazy interdimensional creatures. Like, I'll take that, you know? So Ryan, how about you, buddy?
Yeah.
What about your top 3 favorite moments from Beyond?
My top 3 favorite moments. You mentioned the first one earlier. It's the melted Detective Brownlee scene. That was just so good and very reminiscent of the melted what's his nuts scene, the 80s douche canoe from The Fly that we saw last episode. And then my second is Dr. Tillinghast fighting his way out of the Pretorius monster at the end of the film, telling Barbara Crampton's character to run. It was just like the culmination of everything. You got the Dr. Pretorius monster in all his goo, rubber latex suit glory, but then you've got Dr. Tillinghast trying to fight his way out and shoving his hand through. And yeah, it was just like, it took everything just up another level when you thought it couldn't get any cooler. I loved that scene very much. And my last one is the S&M outfit scene with Barbara Crampton, but specifically the line delivery of Detective Brownlee when he said, "I thought I told you to get dressed." And he hits that, lifts his chin up and he hits that hard ass and dressed. "I thought I told you to get dressed." I love that so much.
Awesome. Great moments there from a very enjoyable film. And with that, we will go ahead and progress to star ratings. Ryan, why don't you go ahead and kick us off on that one?
Look, man, this thing isn't perfect, and it's not like cinema in a Martin Scorsese sense, but God damn it was fun. I'm giving this 3 3/4 stars.
Excellent. So for me, I got to go 4 pink lighting gels, 4.5 sexy leather outfits, and 5 grotesque practical horrors from Beyond. All accounts to 4 1/4 out of 5 stars for From Beyond.
Fantastic.
Again, this is not high art, but it is an excellent, enjoyable film. I loved every minute of it. And again, I think we've laid out our case for everyone watching and listening. And all of you should have a pretty good idea whether or not this film is for you at this point, I would say.
Yeah, Jason. I mean, this has just been so fantastic. This body horror series.
It really has.
We've covered some body horror along the way as we've done this show now for almost 5 years. But, some of these I haven't seen in many years, like The Fly. Some of these I've never seen. Society and Possession. From Beyond, I've always wanted to see. Obviously we've covered a lot of Stewie G here on the show. So great little run here. I hope you guys have enjoyed it as the audience. And we'll see what we move on to next.
Absolutely, man. I have enjoyed every minute of doing this with you here and looking forward to the next series. Now, for all of our viewers and listeners, do want to ask you, if you enjoyed this episode, do please tell your friends, help spread the word. Go ahead and give us those likes, subscribes, rate, follows, all those things help us out. And if you would like to see us review a specific film, you can reach out to us on Instagram at Esoterica Cinema or via email at esotericacinema@gmail.com. If you do watch on YouTube, feel free to leave a comment in the section below, and we'll go ahead and respond to you there. For everyone else, thanks so much for watching Esoterica Cinema. Keep enjoying movies and appreciating cinema.